So, hello everybody, my name is Chris Budd. I've written 5 books, 2 non-fiction and 3 novels, which you will see ever so subtly placed behind me. The 2 non-fiction books, the Financial Wellbeing Book is about money and happiness. The Eternal Business is about employee ownership and how to sell a business. Today I'm going to talk about how to write a novel, but before I start, I would just point out that writing a business book has many similar principles to writing a novel. So I will be touching on both, and you can apply the principles to both, and we can talk about both later on. What I would like to do is to share with you some of the things that I have learned about writing books over the last 10 years. And I'm going to call in the help of some of the great writers and artists in history to quote, to back up some of my points and what I've learned from them. The first step I would suggest in writing a novel is to think about why you want to write a novel. Good reasons would include because you've got something to say, or you want intellectual stimulation, or perhaps you just want to entertain. Bad reasons would include because you want to be an author. Lots of people like the idea of being a writer, but they don't actually get around to doing it. Probably the worst reason is because you want to make money out of it. So a quick question, you can put the answer in chat if you would, please. What do you think is the average number of books that a published book, published by a proper author, sells in its first year in America? The average number of novels sold in its first year. Now, just imagine that Harry Potter series has sold 500 million copies around the world. Harge reckons 1,000, Lawrence is 200, Anne-Marie is 1,000. You're all quite low, actually. People usually go a few thousand, 5,000 from Joe. So the answer is 250. This rises to about 3,000 in its lifetime. So the average novel in America sells 3,000 copies in its lifetime. Bearing in mind that's an average, and Harry Potter sort of a 500 million, you can tell that there aren't many books sold. The digital only self-published book sells about 250 copies in its lifetime. Now, every time I sell a book on Amazon at a retail price of £9.99, I receive £1.29. Amazon earns 3 times more out of each book it sells than I earn. So, as the Americans would say, do the math. I write because I love it, because I have to write, but you don't do it to make money. So you've decided that you want to write a novel just because you want to write a novel. Now, where do you start? Well, you might have a burning issue that you want to get off your chest, or you've got a great yarn to tell, or there's an emotional journey of a character that you want to explore. Maybe you don't actually know, and I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. You don't have to have all the answers at the beginning. In fact, part of the fun of writing is to use the process to think things through. One common question I get asked is whether I have the whole plot decided in advance. The latest novel is called The Vanishing Point, and I had the ending of that from the beginning. The whole thing came to me in a walk around the garden one afternoon. J.K. Rowling, again, is famous that she mapped out the entire Harry Potter story across all books in one long train journey to Scotland. On the other hand, my second book, The Manners from Heaven, the ending to that didn't reveal itself until it was about 2/3 of the way through. There's a really good resource for writers, a Writers and Artists Yearbook, and there's some advice in the latest edition of that where they suggest that you should take 3 months researching your story before you get started on actually writing it. On the other hand, the popular Japanese author Haruki Murakami is famous for the fact that he doesn't have a plot at all. He just starts writing and sees where it goes. Historical fiction probably takes more research. I rather like the story of Alfred Hitchcock, who would arrive on the movie set at the start of one of his films. First day of shooting, the lighting people are ready, the actors have got their lines learned, all the scenery's in place. And he would sit down and he would say on that first day of shooting, great, that's another film finished then. And everyone would kind of look at him as if to say, what are you talking about? But he's got his storyboard, it's all scripted. He knows everything that's going to happen. He just needs to just put it down now. I'm kind of halfway between the two. The book I'm writing at the moment is about a prisoner. So I've done some research on prison procedures and read some books about people and their life in prison. And now I have the space to actually write the story. It's very tempting to think that the first thing to decide upon is what you are writing about. However, I often don't realize that until I'm a long way through a first draft. I'll come back to that point. Take The Vanishing Point, for example. It was only about 2/3 of the way through writing that novel that I realized that I was writing about the importance of having meaning and purpose in life when faced with huge global events that we can't control. Now, I started writing that book in January 2019, so it's been a very cathartic experience to write that, given what's been going on over the ensuing years. I like to write because I want to express concepts and ideas, to get the reader thinking. Nothing is more fun than attending a book group discussion when people are discussing the ideas that you spent several years writing down. I all love attending book group debates. Whether they like them or not doesn't matter, actually. So in Manners from Heaven, for example, the book opens with a solicitor being the victim of a road rage incident. Angry, in retaliation, he kidnaps the driver of the car, takes him home to his house, puts him in the loft and tortures him, and applies a Korean brainwashing technique in order to make that man a nicer person. Now, I think that's a fascinating concept. You see all across history and all through the world that people do really quite horrible and terrible things for what they think are good causes. So by creating a kind of extreme and darkly comic situation affecting two individuals, it became a really interesting concept that I could explore. So just coming back to this idea about what you are writing about, the film critic Mark Kermode likes to say Jaws isn't about a shark. What he means by that is that the plot is about a shark, but the film is really about many things. It's a comment on priorities, for example, the mayor who won't close the beach over the 4th of July weekend, choosing commerce over personal safety, very relevant to the lockdown of the last year. It's about masculinity, the three very different male characters on the boat. You could say it's a statement about the changing nature of America, with a shark a metaphor for outside forces such as communism, which America can't combat because it's so divided. There's lots of things that Jaws is about. In the book, The Situation and the Story, Vivian Gornick describes a trip that she takes with her husband, who she later divorced, and a third person, all three of whom were journalists. And they went canoeing down the Rio Grande, which at long stretches forms the border with Mexico. Now, on this trip, which was including whitewater rafting, a lot of Mexicans appeared on the Mexican side and took pot shots at them with a rifle. Now, when they came back, they all wrote articles about that experience. The journalist, Vivian Gornick herself wrote about how she saw things in her husband in this extreme situation that she didn't recognize, which led to their divorce. The husband wrote about the excitement of whitewater rafting for a sports magazine, and the third person wrote about immigrants in America. So the three of them had exactly the same experience, but they took away from it a completely different story. So maybe you have a vague idea of what you want to talk about, or perhaps you've a really good, clear idea. But what you've got to do now is create some characters that are believable, or that you can have fun, and that you can have fun with, that you will actually want to spend some time with. Now, the next bit for me is the greatest challenge, because those characters have to do something. They've got to walk around, take actions, talk to each other, all in a way that reveals and is consistent with their personalities, that moves the plot along, and which brings out the issues and makes the points that I'm trying to highlight. And this isn't easy. What you need to avoid is telling too much. Show, don't tell. If a character is angry, you don't say Wendy was angry, you get Wendy to do something that demonstrates that she is angry. Likewise, it's best to try and avoid absolute statements. So there's a great quote from Anton Chekhov who said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." This is a lot harder than it might sound when you're also trying to create characters the reader can care about, and you're trying to tell a story. There's a lot of moving parts going on, which is why it's so much fun, because it's a challenge. So let's go back to talk about characters. Here's a really important tip. Don't base a character on someone you know, especially if that character is a serial killer. Your friends are going to read your books, and they do like to see if they can spot themselves. On the other hand, it is easier to think about how somebody might react if you do think about somebody you know. So I amalgamate. My characters will be made up of three people that I know, and taking certain characteristics to put them into a character. And it does make it easy to envisage what they might do. Now, I've used the phrase earlier on, first draft. How many drafts does a book need? Well, my first novel, Bridge of Straw, went through 7 full drafts. If any of you saw the film Suffragette, the woman who wrote that script, Abby Morgan, she wrote 17 complete rewrites of that script. And if you know that you're going to be rewriting later on, there's a number of points to draw from it. Firstly, and I know everybody is different, but I personally don't think that a first draft should be crafted. I subscribe to the Ernest Hemingway quote, "Write drunk, edit sober." Doesn't literally mean drunk, although it may have been the case for him, but he means write with freedom and abandon, knowing that you can change it or you will be changing it later. So when you write your first draft, it does mean it can be difficult to keep going when you know that what you're writing is going to be edited later. The vanishing point, first draft, was 110,000 words, and the eventual book was 85,000 words. So I've got entire chapters and long paragraphs that have been deleted that I think are still quite good, but they just didn't fit. The songwriter Neil Finn talks about the rule of 9. Only 1 in 10 songs Hugh writes will make it to an album, but he's got to write the first 9 in order to get to the 10th good one. It's therefore important, I think, at least for me in my process, not to try and write elegant prose in that first draft, unless that's something that comes naturally to you. I find that is my time for thinking about character, plot, what I'm trying to say, and how the interaction of characters will help me to say it. If I spend 5-10 minutes trying to get the perfect expression of an idea in one line, that's going to stop me from helping work through those ideas. Think of it as a metaphor with writing and pottery. The first phase is throwing the clay on the wheel, just getting the ideas down. In the second phase, you're then molding the clay into the shape of pot that you want, which means plot, narrative, arc. And in the third phase, you then paint the pot, which means getting into the individual sentences, working on the prose. So let's talk about that second phase. What is this narrative arc? Well, there's lots of great devices for plot construction, such as action and resolution, the 3-act model, the 5-act model, the repetition and variation. Think the Three Little Pigs story. The narrative arc is how a character learns from and is affected by the events that happen to them. It might just be that the character refuses to change despite the events that happen to them. But the narrative arc is why we care about the characters. Kurt Vonnegut said every character should want something, even if it's just a glass of water. So narrative arc is getting to know the character, giving them a challenge, and then watching them overcome or not that challenge. So you've written a novel, you're happy with the plot and happy with the characters. Don't stop. Now comes my favorite part. The author Neil Gaiman refers to this as being down amongst the words, which is an expression I just love because I know exactly what he means. It's about getting into each line and thinking, can I construct it better? Now you can really have fun with the words. But a word of warning here, the words must not get in the way of the story. If you're stopping to understand what is trying to be said, you're not in the flow of the story anymore. A Bridge of Straw was my first novel, and a friend of mine who's also an author reckons he counts 7 sentences where I had tried to write. There are novelists that can dazzle and amaze with their sentence construction. So F. Scott Fitzgerald's Tender is the Night is one such book. I can read a paragraph of that book 5 times over and just marvel at the amount of ideas it contains. However, every time I do that, I am pausing my reading of the story. Some novels set out with the intention to dazzle and amaze, and Ben Ockery's Famished Road is one of them. If any of you know that book, it's beautiful. I couldn't tell you what the story is particularly, but I know it's like reading poetry. Personally, I'm more interested in getting across ideas and writing a book that entertains than I am showing off my linguistic skills. One tip I would pass on is that you do need to give of yourself when you write. F. Scott Fitzgerald again, his niece wrote a novel and sent in the manuscript, and in a letter back to her giving feedback, he said, "I'm afraid the price for doing professional work is a good deal higher than you are prepared to pay at present. You've got to sell your heart, your strongest reactions, not the little minor things that only touch you lightly." Another question people often ask about characters is, which character is me? The answer is contradictory. None of the characters are me. That would be easy to do, but you can only really do it once. On the other hand, there's a bit of me in all of the characters. In fact, Manners from Heaven did honestly start because I got cut up by somebody in the car and thought, if I got you in a room, and I thought, well, what actually would I do? I haven't got somebody in my loft, by the way. I make that absolutely clear. So you've written your novel, you've gone through some rewrites. How do you know when you're ready to publish? The reality is that most people could probably carry on polishing and improving their manuscript far longer than they do. The French writer Paul Valéry said, "A poem isn't finished, it just gets abandoned." And I think the same goes for a novel. A lot of self-published books in particular suffer from a lack of polishing. I use a publisher, Silverwood Books, and professional editors to make sure that my books are of a certain standard. Another great phrase, and probably my favorite line about writing, is Blaise Pascal, who said, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a shorter one." So keep editing, keep rewriting until it really is as good as you think it can possibly be. And of course, then you will abandon it because you're never going to be totally satisfied. Then comes the moment when you finally publish, which is like the ultimate handing in of your homework. For some reason, everybody thinks that they need to judge your writing skills. People don't say, "What a great story," or "I really enjoyed it." They leave reviews such as, "To begin with, I was somewhat disappointed with the early chapters through their lack of pace and somewhat predictable style." That review did get better, I'm pleased to say, but people think that they need to judge you on your abilities of writing rather than the story and whether they enjoyed it. Another one, "An exceptionally well-written second novel." These are all from Amazon reviews. And then there was a comment, "Why did you write another novel?" Thanks for that, Mum. Friends are actually the worst. I've got this theory that if you know someone who has published a book, you assume that it must be rubbish. Think about it. If you know somebody and they say to you, "I've just self-published a novel, would you like to read it?" Your heart's going to sink. You don't know anybody that is a great author. So if somebody you know has written a novel, it's bound to be rubbish. That's just how people think. The most common comment I get from people who have read my book that know me say, "Do you know, it was actually quite good." If you really want to write, there's only one tip I can really give, which is best summarized by Billy Crystal in the film Throw Mama from the Train. He plays a writing teacher and he tells his student, "A writer writes, always." If you want to learn to be a writer, write. By all means, go on a course or join a creative writing group. That can only help. And read lots. Learn from how other people construct a sentence or a narrative arc, how they make you feel something just by putting words on a page. But at the end of the day, the best way to find your own style, your own voice, is to write. And I will leave the last words to Ernest Hemingway again, who summed up writing pretty perfectly when he said, "There is nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed." Thank you.